The kitchen light hummed with a low, medicinal buzz that made the white counters look like bone. Ralph stood by the stove, his hands trembling as he gripped a cold ceramic mug. My wife said, "I'm going on a date with my coworker." I warned her that walking out would change everything. She left anyway. What followed shattered her, completely in ways she never saw coming. She adjusted her earring in the hall mirror without looking back. Her reflection was a stranger. Lauren wore a silk dress I had never seen, one that cost more than a month of groceries. She smelled of expensive jasmine and a sharp, metallic desperation. I watched the clock on the wall tick toward 7 o'clock. Every second felt like a physical weight pressing against my lungs. She grabbed her designer clutch from the granite island. Her movements were fluid and practiced, as if she had rehearsed this exit 1,000 times in her head. She finally turned to me with dead eyes. I stepped forward, trying to find the woman I married 18 years ago in that hollow gaze. There was nothing left but a cold, clinical indifference. I told her the kids were upstairs doing homework. She didn't even flinch at the mention of our daughter. She said she needed to feel alive again, as if we were the anchors dragging her down. I realized then that she wasn't just leaving for the night. She was trying to erase our entire history. The garage door groaned open, a mechanical roar that echoed through the silent house. I watched through the window as a silver sedan pulled into our driveway. A man sat behind the wheel, his face obscured by the twilight shadows. Lauren didn't hesitate or wave goodbye. She stepped onto the porch and into the cool Phoenix air without a coat. She looked younger in the dim light and far more dangerous. The car door slammed with a final, heavy thud. I sat in the dark for an hour, listening to the house settle into its new, empty shape. My laptop screen glowed on the table, reflecting off the polished wood. I logged into our joint bank account with a sense of impending doom. The numbers on the screen didn't make sense at first. $14,000 had vanished in small, careful increments over the last 4 months. She hadn't just been planning a date. She had been funding a complete escape. My phone buzzed on the counter, a text from my brother, Jake, lighting up the room. He had been watching the silver sedan from the corner of the street as we planned. He sent a single photo of the driver's license plate and a name. Ethan Crawford was no longer a ghost in my marriage. He was a target. I reached for a pen and a legal pad, my grief hardening into a cold, sharp edge. The war for my family had finally begun. I moved to the basement safe to find our paper records. The air smelled of damp concrete and old cardboard. I pulled the heavy steel drawer open, searching for the folder labeled investments. My goal was simple: prove the theft before she returned. My hands brushed against a velvet box I didn't recognize. Inside sat a receipt for a diamond tennis bracelet I had never purchased. The date on the slip matched our wedding anniversary. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked under a heavy weight. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I knew the kids were asleep, but this sound was deliberate and rhythmic. I moved to the stairs, gripping a heavy flashlight as a makeshift club. The kitchen light flickered once, then stayed dark. Shadows stretched across the hardwood floors like reaching fingers. I realized I wasn't alone in the house. A window in the mudroom stood wide open. "Ralph, put the light down," Jake whispered from the pantry. My brother stepped into the dim glow of the hallway. He looked tired, his jacket stained with fresh Arizona dust. He held a thick manila envelope toward me with a grimace. He had followed them to a hotel in Temp. I took the packet, my fingers shaking as I broke the wax seal. Inside were grainy photos of Lauren laughing with a man half my age. We sat at the kitchen table while the clock ticked toward midnight. Jake pointed at a specific photo taken near the hotel lobby bar. Lauren was handing Ethan a thick stack of blue envelopes. I recognized them immediately as my company's proprietary shipping manifests. She wasn't just spending our savings on a cheap affair. She was feeding my business secrets to a direct competitor. The betrayal had moved from the bedroom to the warehouse floor. She's been copying your server logs for months, Jake said. I felt a cold sweat break across my brow. My primary objective shifted from divorce to total survival. If those manifests reached the open market, my distribution empire would collapse by Friday. I looked at the doorbell camera feed on my tablet. Lauren's car pulled back into the driveway at a crawl. Her headlights cut through the dark living room. She was coming inside to finish the job. I tucked the envelopes into my waistband and stood up straight. The front door unlocked with a sharp, mechanical click. Lauren walked in, her heels clicking rhythmically on the tile. She looked flushed and triumphant, her hair slightly mussed from the wind. She didn't notice Jake sitting in the shadows of the corner. She smiled at me, a fake, pitying expression that turned my stomach. "I'm back, Ralph," she said. I noticed she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. I didn't answer her as I reached for my phone. I dialed the number for the North Scottsdale Police Department. Lauren's smile faltered as she saw the blue light of the screen. I told the dispatcher there was a trespasser in my home office. She lunged for the device, but Jake blocked her path with a heavy arm. She screamed a name that wasn't mine. Outside, another car pulled up behind hers with its high beams flashing. The high beams illuminated the foyer like a stage under a spotlight. Lauren backed away from Jake, her designer heels skidding on the tile. The engine outside roared, then cut out into a heavy, menacing silence. I watched the front door through the sidelight as a tall man stepped out. It was Ethan Crawford, looking exactly like the photos Jake had gathered. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a debt collector coming for his prize. "Get out of my way, Jake," Lauren hissed, her voice cracking with fear. She reached for the heavy brass handle, but I stepped into her path. My objective was clear: keep her here until the police arrived. She smelled of panic and cheap hotel soap now. The power in the room shifted as I held up the stolen shipping manifests. Her face went pale, a mask of ivory in the dim light. She knew I had the evidence. Ethan pounded on the oak door, the sound echoing through the hollow house. The wood groaned under his fists, but the deadbolt held firm for now. "Lauren, open up," he shouted, his voice muffled by the thick timber. I stood my ground, feeling the cold weight of the flashlight in my palm. My brother moved toward the back door to cut off any escape. We were a wall of solid bone. Ethan stopped pounding and started kicking. The glass in the sidelight shattered with a violent, crystalline explosion. Shards of diamonds rained onto the hardwood floor near my feet. Ethan reached through the jagged hole, searching for the lock with a frantic hand. I didn't move as his fingers brushed the brass latch. Lauren cheered him on, her face twisted in a desperate, ugly mask. I realized she had promised him more than just secrets. She had promised him my life's work. I grabbed his wrist and twisted it against the broken glass frame. He howled in pain, his arm trapped in the jagged teeth of the window. Lauren lunged at me, her nails raking across my cheek in a sharp sting. I pushed her back, my focus locked on the man outside. The pressure in the room was a physical thing now. I felt the heat of his breath through the hole. He dropped a heavy metal object. The object hit the floor with a dull, heavy thud that sounded like lead. I looked down and saw a thick stack of printed emails. They weren't from Lauren to Ethan, but from Ethan to a private equity firm. He wasn't working for a competitor at all. He was setting up a hostile takeover of my entire distribution network. Lauren froze as she saw the logo on the header. She had been played as much as I had. Sirens wailed in the distance, a low hum that grew into a scream. Ethan stopped struggling and yanked his bloody arm back through the broken glass. He ran for his car, leaving the incriminating papers behind on the porch. Lauren collapsed onto the stairs, her silk dress torn and stained with dust. I picked up the emails, reading the final line of the contract. Our children's names were listed as secondary beneficiaries. The betrayal was deep. Blue and red lights strobed against the foyer walls, turning the broken glass into shards of fire. The police were seconds away from the driveway. My objective was to secure the physical evidence before Lauren could destroy it. She reached for the private equity contract, her fingers clawing at the paper. I pulled the documents away, feeling the heavy grit of the porch dust on my skin. She looked at me with a wild, desperate hunger in her eyes. He promised we would be partners. Lauren whispered, her voice a jagged ruin. She didn't mean partners in marriage. She meant partners in the theft of my life's work. Jake stood by the door, his silhouette blocking the strobe lights as the officers climbed the porch steps. I felt a surge of cold clarity as the front door swung wide. The cooling Arizona air rushed inside, smelling of ozone and spent fuel. Lauren began to weep, but her eyes remained sharp. Two officers entered with flashlights drawn, the beams cutting through the haze of the living room. They saw the blood on the window frame and the scattered papers. Hands where we can see them, the taller officer commanded. I held up the shipping manifests and the equity contract. Jake stepped back, showing his empty palms with practiced calm. Lauren didn't move from the stairs. She looked like a ghost in her torn silk. She pointed at me. He attacked my friend, she lied, her voice gaining a sudden, terrifying strength. The officers shifted their focus to me, their hands resting near their belts. I didn't flinch. I pointed to the doorbell, camera mounted above the shattered sidelight. I told them the digital record would show Ethan kicking the door. The tension in the room was a physical weight. The officers looked at the broken glass, then back at Lauren's pristine, unbruised face. They knew. The shorter officer moved to the porch to retrieve the papers Ethan had dropped in his flight. He walked back in, flipping through the pages with a grim expression. This looks like a corporate fraud matter, he noted. Lauren's face crumbled again as she realized her lie had failed. I felt a temporary victory, but the officer's next words stopped my heart. He found a small, black device taped to the back of the contract. It was a transmitter. I realized then that Ethan hadn't just been stealing manifests. He had been listening to every conversation in our kitchen for months. Every strategy session and every private word with my children was recorded on a remote server. The primary obstacle wasn't the police or the theft. It was the total surveillance of my home. I looked at the ceiling vents, wondering where else he had hidden his ears. The house felt like a cage. The police led Lauren toward the cruiser for questioning about the break-in. She didn't look at me as they walked her through the glass. I turned to Jake, my hands finally starting to shake. We needed to sweep the entire building before the sun came up. I reached into my pocket for my keys and felt something sharp. I pulled out a small, brass key I had never seen before. It had a hotel room number engraved on it. The brass key felt cold against my palm as the police cruiser pulled away. Lauren's silhouette vanished behind a tinted glass, leaving me in a house that felt poisoned. My primary objective was to find the recording hub before Ethan deleted the data remotely. I looked at the transmitter the officer had found. It was a high-end model, likely connected to the local Wi-Fi. Jake grabbed a ladder from the garage while I opened the network settings on my tablet. The signal strength was peaking near the kitchen. I scanned the ceiling, looking for anything out of place in the recessed lighting. My obstacle was time. Ethan was surely scrubbing his servers now that the plan had failed. I pushed a stool toward the pantry, my eyes fixed on a smoke detector that looked slightly newer than the others. I reached up and twisted the plastic casing. It popped open to reveal a tiny camera lens and a micro SD card. My stomach turned as I realized it was aimed directly at our family table. Jake climbed the ladder to check the vents in the hallway. He found a second device hidden behind the return air grill. I felt a surge of nausea. We were being watched in the most private corners of our lives. I pulled the tablet back up and noticed a strange outgoing data stream. It wasn't going to a cloud server. It was broadcasting to a device located within 50 feet of our front porch. Ethan hadn't actually fled the neighborhood. He was watching us. I walked to the shattered sidelight and peered into the darkness of the street. A black SUV sat idling 2 houses down with its lights off. My objective shifted instantly to a confrontation. I didn't tell Jake. I slipped out the back door and moved through the shadows of the hibiscus bushes. The desert air was biting now, smelling of dust and stagnant pool water. I reached the side of the vehicle and saw the glow of a laptop screen inside. Ethan was there. I smashed the driver's side window with the heavy flashlight. Glass showered the interior as Ethan screamed, shielding his face from the debris. I reached inside and grabbed the laptop before he could close the lid. He shifted the car into gear, his tires screeching against the asphalt as he sped away. I stood in the middle of the road, holding the unlocked computer. The screen showed a live feed of my daughter's bedroom. I realized the surveillance wasn't just about business secrets anymore. I ran back to the house, my heart ready to burst from my chest. Jake met me at the door, his face pale with a new kind of terror. He held a small, leather diary he had found tucked inside the ventilation duct. It belonged to Lauren, but the handwriting on the final page wasn't hers. It was a set of instructions on how to sedate the children for a long trip. I looked at the laptop again. A message popped up on the screen. "I am already inside," the text read. I dropped the laptop as a floorboard creaked directly above my head in the nursery. We had assumed Ethan was in the car, but he had used a decoy. The man in the SUV was a hired driver. The brass key in my pocket wasn't for a hotel. It matched the old service lock on our attic stairs. I looked at Jake and saw the same realization in his eyes. We were not alone in the house yet. I gripped the brass key until it bit into my skin. My objective was to reach the children before Ethan could act. The attic stairs were tucked behind a narrow door in the upper hallway. Jake followed closely, his breathing heavy in the quiet corridor. Every shadow seemed to move as we passed the nursery. I reached the service door and felt the wood vibrating. A low, rhythmic scratching sound came from the other side. Someone was trying to unlock it from within. The lock turned with a sharp, metallic snap before I could insert my key. The door swung inward, revealing a darkness that smelled of insulation and old dust. Ethan stood there, his face streaked with sweat and aggression. He held a heavy wrench in his right hand. He didn't look like the polished salesman from the corporate photos anymore. He looked desperate and cornered. Behind him, the attic window was open to the night air. He had been waiting for the police to leave. I lunged forward, tackling him into the narrow space. We crashed against a stack of holiday boxes, spilling ornaments across the floor. Jake tried to grab the wrench, but Ethan swung wildly in the dark. The struggle was silent and brutal. I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder as we hit a wooden support beam. Ethan was stronger than he looked. He pinned me down, his eyes glowing with a manic intensity. He whispered that he had already sent the final manifests. Jake finally managed to wrench the tool from Ethan's grip. The metal hit the floor with a ringing chime. I rolled away and stood up, gasping for air in the thin heat. We had him trapped in the corner of the attic. He looked at us and started to laugh. It was a high, thin sound that chilled my blood. He pointed toward the open window. A rope ladder hung from the sill, swaying in the wind. He wasn't alone. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The SUV had been a distraction, but the attic was a staging ground. I heard a muffled cry from the bedroom directly below us. It was Sophie. My heart stopped for a heartbeat. Ethan wasn't the primary threat in the house. He was the sentry. I turned and ran for the stairs, leaving Jake to handle Ethan. I burst into the hallway, my boots thudding against the carpet. The nursery door was standing wide open. Lauren stood by the crib, her silk dress stained and torn. She held Sophie in her arms, her face a mask of pale determination. She wasn't weeping anymore. She looked at me with a cold, terrifying clarity. "We're leaving, Ralph," she said. She had a small syringe in her hand, the needle gleaming under the nightlight. She wasn't protecting her daughter. She was preparing to sedate her for the flight. I took a slow step toward her, my hands open. The power balance had shifted completely. Lauren was no longer the wayward wife. She was a kidnapper. I told her the police were still at the end of the block. She laughed, a sound that held no joy. She said, "Ethan had already cleared their path through the backyard." I looked at the window and saw a shadow move on the patio. There was another man, waiting outside near the pool. They had planned this extraction with military precision and cold hearts. I noticed the small black device on Lauren's wrist. It was a GPS tracker, identical to the ones used in my shipping warehouse. She had used my own inventory to tag the children weeks ago. This wasn't a spontaneous escape. It was a professional abduction funded by the private equity firm. I realized my business wasn't just being stolen. It was being used as the infrastructure for my own family's disappearance. I felt a surge of pure, icy rage. "Put the needle down, Lauren," I said, my voice dropping to a low growl. I moved closer, blocking her path to the window. She hissed at me, her grip tightening on our daughter. Sophie stirred, her eyes fluttering open in the dim light. She saw her mother's face and began to whimper. The terror in my child's voice broke the last of my restraint. I lunged for the syringe, catching Lauren's wrist mid-air. We fell against the changing table. The needle snapped against the wooden edge, spilling the clear liquid onto the rug. Lauren screamed, a high-pitched sound that echoed through the house. Outside, the shadow on the patio began to climb the trellis. Jake appeared in the doorway, his face bruised but his eyes focused. He held Ethan by the collar of his torn shirt. The police sirens returned, louder than before. I looked down and saw a second syringe tucked into Lauren's belt. She wasn't finished yet. I pinned Lauren's wrist against the hardwood floor. My objective was to disarm her before she used the second syringe. She fought with a feral strength I had never seen. Sophie's wails pierced the night, a sound that tore at my soul. Jake struggled to hold a thrashing Ethan in the doorway behind us. The shadow on the trellis reached the windowsill, his boot scraping the siding. The room felt smaller as the air grew thick with a cold, metallic dread. "Let her go, Ralph," Lauren hissed, her face inches from mine. I saw a flash of silver as she reached for the hidden needle. I shifted my weight, pinning her shoulder down with my knee. The second syringe rolled across the carpet toward the open closet door. My heart raced as I realized the liquid inside was dark and viscous. This was not the same sedative from before. It looked like something far more permanent. I heard the trellis groan under the weight of the intruder. The man outside vaulted into the nursery, his movement silent and professional. He wore a dark tactical vest and carried a short, weighted baton. Jake lunged at him, but Ethan used the distraction to break free. The power balance shifted in a heartbeat as we were outnumbered in the small room. The intruder didn't go for me or Jake. He moved directly toward my son's bedroom across the hall. I heard Tyler's door slam shut. A heavy bolt slid home from the outside. "Tyler," I roared, trying to stand, but Lauren gripped my shirt with frantic hands. She was laughing now, a broken and hollow sound that chilled my bones. The man with the baton stood guard at the nursery door. Ethan moved to the window, signaling to someone in the yard. I realized they weren't just taking the kids. They were turning the house into a fortress to stall the police. The sirens were close, but the walls were thick. We were trapped in a siege. I looked at Lauren and saw the glint of a small remote in her palm. She pressed a button before I could stop her. A sharp, high-pitched whine erupted from the ceiling vents. It was an ultrasonic jammer, a device that blocks electronic signals, designed to kill all cellular and radio signals. The police outside would be blind and deaf. My objective had failed. We were isolated in a dead zone of our own making. Jake fell back as Ethan kicked him in the ribs. The room began to spin. The intruder moved back into the nursery, his face covered by a black mask. He didn't speak, but his intent was clear as he raised the baton. I looked at the floor and saw the broken syringe liquid smoking on the rug. It wasn't a sedative or a poison. It was a chemical trigger for a fire. The rug began to smolder, a thick acrid smoke rising toward the smoke detector. The device I had tampered with remained silent. The trap was finally closing. "The manifests are already gone, Ralph." Ethan sneered from the window. He held a tablet showing a progress bar at 99%. My business was being liquidated in real time onto an offshore server. Every asset I had built was vanishing into a digital void. Lauren stood up, her eyes bright with a manic triumph. She didn't care about the smoke or the fire. She wanted the destruction to be absolute. She reached for Sophie again, but I blocked her with my body. I grabbed the heavy oak diaper pail and swung it with everything I had left. It caught the intruder's knee with a sickening crack. He went down, his baton clattering under the crib. Jake tackled Ethan, driving him through the drywall and into the bathroom. The pressure in the room was unbearable. I looked at the window and saw a police drone hovering just outside. It was recording everything, but it couldn't intervene. We were on our own. Lauren pulled a small knife. I realized the knife wasn't for me or the children. She jammed the blade into the wall near the window, prying at a hidden panel. A small, black suitcase sat nestled behind the insulation. This was the true prize of the night. It contained the hard, copy encryption keys for the private equity firm. It contained the hard, copy encryption keys for the private equity firm. Without them, Ethan's digital theft was useless. The power was in that box. Lauren gripped the handle and looked at the fire spreading across the floor. She made her choice. She threw the suitcase out the window into the darkness of the pool. Ethan screamed in rage and dove out after it. The intruder scrambled to follow, leaving Lauren alone with me in the smoke. I grabbed Sophie and Tyler, who had managed to kick his door down. We ran for the attic stairs as the nursery was engulfed in flames. I looked back and saw Lauren standing still. She was holding a photo of us from ASU. She didn't move as the floor collapsed. The fire department's floodlights turned the backyard into a clinical white stage. I stood on the damp grass, clutching Tyler and Sophie as the smoke cleared from the charred nursery window. My objective was simply survive the fallout and secure our safety. The equity firm's lawyers were already waiting at the curb with a stack of non-disclosure agreements. Lauren had survived the fall, but she sat in the back of a cruiser with her head bowed. Her eyes were empty of fire. The forensic team pulled a waterlogged black suitcase from the bottom of our pool. It was the encryption key Lauren had tried to save for her escape. Without it, the digital theft remained a messy, incomplete crime. Ethan Crawford was nowhere to be found, having vanished into the desert shadows before the police arrived. I felt a hollow victory settling in my chest. My business was wounded, but the core infrastructure was still mine. I looked at the blackened siding of our home. 8 months later, the Scottsdale house was a memory sold for land value. We moved to a quiet ranch in North Phoenix, where the air felt cleaner. The automotive business was thriving again, stripped of the excess and the spies. Tyler was excelling in his computer classes, his trauma hardening into a sharp, focused ambition. Sophie played in the sprinklers, her laughter finally ringing true. We had rebuilt a life without the lies that had nearly buried us. I felt steady. A legal courier arrived on a Tuesday, carrying a thick envelope from the state prison. I opened it to find a letter from Lauren. She had been sentenced to 10 years for fraud and attempted kidnapping. The note wasn't a plea for forgiveness or a confession of love. It was a detailed map of a Swiss bank account I had never seen. She claimed it held the remainder of the stolen $14,000. I realized then that her betrayal had a second act. I called Jake and showed him the account numbers. He traced the transactions through a private investigator in Zurich. The money wasn't sitting in a vault waiting for us. It was being used to fund Ethan Crawford's new life in South America. Lauren hadn't sent the map to help me. She had sent it to show me that even from a cell, she could still watch me fail to catch him. The lie had evolved into a permanent digital scar. I closed the laptop and walked out to the porch to watch the sunset. The orange glow felt like a promise of silence. I wouldn't chase the ghost of Ethan or the money. My children were safe, and my hands were clean of her schemes. I watched my son help his sister with her homework under the patio light. The true value of my life wasn't in a ledger or a vault. It was here. I finally stopped looking for the cameras.